Hey y'all, we are climbing the labyrinth. It has been a little bit. Things have been kind of crazy around the church and Eberline household, things going on. So this has been a little while coming, but kind of I was putting off some of this until after the Dakota Classis meeting, which we just had last weekend. And so my hope is if you're tuning in now, this will give you a quick update on some things going on and some issues. So one will be quick update on Dakota Classis, and the other one will be the whole topic that seems to be stirring around on whether you pay assessments to the RCA or not, and why we do those things after moving on. So first, let me just say that the Dakota Classis had their annual meeting, and it was good. It was great. Myself and Pastor Craig and one of the elders, Jeff from First Reformed, we did worship. We helped lead worship on Friday evening, and Saturday was business. And I will tell those of you watching this, I've been told that if you have not already, you should hit the subscribe button down below and then turn the bell on so that you can get a notification when some of this info comes out. And that this one may be more geared towards folks in Dakota Classis and specifically people within First Church that might be helpful for you, so that this is just a little bit of info of what's going on. And for the rest of you, this is maybe just kind of info for what about in the future. It is very unlikely. If you are in an RCA church, this may be helpful. It's probably not so helpful to a large part if you're in a Presbyterian church or in a CRC church, because I know that there are churches looking towards the ARC, and in the next coming weeks, months, maybe after the holiday season, because things are getting a little crazy around here with Advent and Thanksgiving coming, that I will try to put out some info of just kind of basic stuff for ARC, because I know that some of that is kind of coming along the line of maybe more bite-sized, manageable pieces. Because I have a lot of videos out there about ARC stuff, but they tend to lean towards 45 minutes plus. And so maybe some smaller chunks of some more individual topics will be helpful. I will look towards that. First, as we get going here, I'm going to try and keep this under like 15 minutes. So one is Dakota Classis met. It was great. And the big thing to take away is 31 churches from Dakota Classis. There are 33 organized churches, I believe. No, 34 organized churches. 31 of those 34 have effectively been voted and passed everything. They're free and clear that they will depart the RCA and journey into ARC beginning December 31st, January 1. So December 31st is the effective date for the termination of their time in the RCA. January 1 is the beginning of the ARC journey, and it was good. There was some conversation and some dialogue, but by and large, Dakota Classis has been really unified in this, and that goes a lot to say for the admin team and Seth Sundstrom and Brenda and some of the others. Our very own Dennis Olson at First Reformed, who is the president of Dakota Classis now, at least in the meantime, that they've done a great job going through tons and tons of meetings and information and all sorts of stuff as we move through. And so we are the first big wave that is leaving the RCA and going into the ARC. Now, given the climate of General Synod and the lead towards what I would just classify as a full-on kind of progressive liberal interpretation of Scripture and a full-on just leaving of historical Orthodox faith towards, maybe for another video, is just the flat-out, almost heterodox approach, verging on some what I would consider anti-Christ embraces within their theology and their doctrine and their practice within many of the areas of the RCA that are bleeding over into General Synod and much of the staff that is kind of taking root. A lot of wokeism, a lot of racism is the new original sin, that your whiteness is now the thing that is sinful rather than sin itself, and the only way to expiate that or to have propitiation, while using all those fancy terms, the only way to cleanse you from that original sin of racism and whiteness is you have to be anti-racist, and some of that stuff is just completely bonkers. So churches are beginning to look. Dakota Classis met. We are going, and everything has been approved and passed through. Now we're working through the legal documentation before the end of the year with bylaws and articles of incorporation and some of that sort of stuff that the churches have to work through. But 31 of the 34, and of the other 3 that remain, one of those I have heard is, I can't say officially working towards their petition to go, but unofficially is becoming more intentional about that, following the decisions and the conversations that were had at General Synod this year. And the other 2, I'm not really sure. So if you are a part of those congregations, I'm not really sure where the other 2 are going. They are, I think one of them is a yoked congregation with the CRC, and the other one has not had a minister for a number of years, and they have the same moderator between the 2 churches. So maybe that is the individual person that's working through that, or the congregations together are just unsure. I'm not real savvy to that situation. And then there are a number of church plant-ish ministries between Livingstone and Freedom's Gate, the prison church that is on inside and outside of the walls. Their direction moving forward, and City Church, their direction moving forward. At this point, City Church is staying with the RCA, and Freedom's Gate and Livingstone, we're still figuring out some of the details there because they're not fully organized congregations of how that plays out. So 31 churches have been approved to go, effective December 31st. The next big thing that was kind of questioned was, so what do we do about the assessments? A few $100,000, especially from Dakota Classis. Every Classis is different. Assessments to Regional Synod and assessments to General Synod. And I should say right off the bat that all of these assessments are done very similar to how your house property tax works, that everything is done in arrears. So as we are paying this year assessments, they are for the previous year. And next year into 2022, we will be paying the assessments of 2021. And so they're backdated a year basically. And as you work through that, the struggle is okay, well, they're a year in arrears, but at the same time, we're out and we don't believe the things that they believe. And that is the struggle. That is a big struggle as we look at things, because twofold, in conversations with Dan and Tim on the ARC side of things, nobody wants to put a bad taste in anybody's mouth for the ARC. And those of us in Dakota that are struggling with this issue don't want to make that issue something bigger for everybody else moving in. And so the struggle is let's say Dakota Classis, they approved to pay the assessments. Everything is going through like normal, like that is part of the deal, and they said that they wanted to do that, and a number of conversations from the admin team. But if the motion had been made to not pay those, then what are we doing to all of the churches that would follow us into the ARC? Eventually, the assumption, and maybe rightly so, or maybe it's just pessimism on my part, is I think that would probably taint how the RCA views things moving forward. And so the decisions they made at last year's General Synod with just the rules and regulations to give kind of some nuts and bolts to how churches leave, they could totally change those again. They would do it as a rules and regulations sort of deal, and not as something that's constitutional. And so I'm not sure how that really would play out when it comes to legal things, but the gist here is you pay them because you have to pay them and you already accrued them. The more theological issue is paying them within the mindset of are they something that you would give to it? And the way that here's a way to think of it. If you were giving to a missionary and believed in them and supported them, and then you come to find out that they were not proclaiming Christ, but that any way to Jesus was okay, whether that be through Allah or Muhammad or Vishnu or whatever it may be, would you feel like you'd be obligated to continue to pay them? Well, you wouldn't want to support them. Or let's say that you were supporting an agency that was helping out with kids. This is kind of one of the things around Christmas time. You get a lot of stuff through Compassion and all of those things. And what if all of a sudden they weren't helping them? They were finding ways to funnel them into slavery or something. Like, you wouldn't support that anymore. Well, specifically as a church entity within a theological organization, providing funds towards an organization that is going way off of the deep end, the way that I think of it is in 1 Corinthians 5, Paul has this struggle with a family in the church that is having sexual immorality and possibly some sort of incest. And the way that he handles it within the church is you need to no longer have fellowship with them. You need to treat them like they are an outsider. The idea is that we judge those that are inside in staying inside, but once you're out, you're not under our judgment any longer, but you're also out. And supporting that doesn't happen anymore. And then he moves forward as you begin to see things where he talks about what sexual ethic is, and then he moves into what it means to actually have fellowship together and the Lord's Supper, that we participate in these things together. And so being held outside of that means outside of that. Like, you don't get any of those benefits. And so some of this is the RCA truly is moving that direction, but there are pockets in the RCA that are not. And I've had conversations with others where it's, well, maybe this is just a turn the other cheek moment. And within that section in Matthew, I think Jesus is really pointing at when you turn the other cheek, the idea was that they slapped you in the face and you turn around so that they have to look you straight in the eye again. Like, go ahead and do it again. And if somebody takes your shirt, give them your tunic too. Well, the idea is then you have nothing to cover up with at night, and people will know that. It will be obvious to other people. If they ask you to go 1 mile, go 2 miles. Well, they could get in trouble for actually you going 2 miles, and other people would notice these things. That it's not just a passive sort of reality, but it is a subversively passive sort of thing, that there isn't an overt strike back, but it is make it known to the rest of the people around, which would be similar to where Paul's pointing, like, hey, we're not doing something to the person that is outside to say this is punitive, but you're outside because you are not believing the same things as us, and so we're not having fellowship with you. So the hard part for me was giving dollars to the RCA, especially the General Synod. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to, for the sake of not making this any longer than it is, I'm going to open up a window here, new screen recording. And from this recording here, what I'm going to do is go through actually just really, really fast. And the only reason that I'm putting it up here is so that y'all can see it. Is that I'm not making this stuff up. So here's a screen recording. You can look at it. This is the General Synod of America Consolidated Financial Statements with Independent Auditors Report, September 30 of 2020. So this is last year, 2020 and 2019. And as I scroll down through this, what I want to get to is, how much money are we talking? Because we have this conversation of, well, the RCA has a bunch of money. Well, maybe they do, maybe they don't. So this was the most current financial report that I could find, and I'm going to scroll down. And so you can see here, it'll give kind of the basics of it, gives you the info, and here we go. As of September 30 of 2020, you can see that there are $47,180,826 in total assets. Total assets. Now, some of those are specific investments. Some of those are long-term investments. Some of those are held in specific liabilities and stuff. And you scroll down to the lower part, and we get to net assets. So the The net assets for the Reformed Church in America, General Synod, 41,159,665. This was in 2020. The market did some weird things, but it's also gone up. Things have actually probably increased. So you're looking at $41+ million of total net assets. $47+ million of total assets. And yes, some of those have restrictions on them, that donors have put restrictions on those assets. For $41 million. And not only that, I'm pretty sure that each of the Heartland Synod, or each of the synods, we're in Heartland Synod, has a good chunk of reserves too. So Heartland Synod has, I believe, like 2 point something million, maybe $2.2 million in reserve funds, assets. And so you start looking at some of that stuff and you go, wow, they got a lot of money and they're asking us to pay more money. And it doesn't sit right with me. And it doesn't sit right with some people in Dakota Classis. And I know that if you are in the RCA and other areas, that shouldn't sit right with you either. Here's what I proposed at the Classis meeting, was to ask that our funds, our assessments, be designated to specific areas. Now, the General Synod does not have to do that. It's just like if I write a check to the church and say, hey, would you please designate this towards the youth fund or towards carpeting or whatever. You can do that, but the church is not bound legally to fulfill your obligation. They just simply honor it most of the time. Once you give money to some entity or some person, it is theirs to do with as they choose. They can choose to use it in a certain way or not. What I would have proposed, and what I have proposed through Dakota Classis, that isn't officially an action necessarily, but was a part of the new business, and so it takes the next calendar year with the admin team. But what I proposed was, if just like in your local church, we can ask funds to be designated towards certain areas, we need to investigate that and do the same thing. So while we have to pay them a few $100,000, knowing that they have $42 million in the bank, we can say, would you please designate our funds towards the Argentinian churches that are in need of translators and transportation and some of those things, that we can help further those areas that truly are kingdom gospel areas, and not further areas where we know that it's going to advance a more progressive, woke, kind of crazy church culture. Because all of the stuff that you're reading through and watching on the news, a lot of that wokeism stuff is really bleeding into and being syncretized. There's the struggle where the news media wants to tell you that there is an evangelicalism and a Christian nationalism that is kind of blurring its way in. And to some degree, that's true. But there is also a liberal wokeism side that is bleeding in, becoming a new religion. And we talked about that with the racism stuff. And that some of it is just counter gospel, that it is completely outside of when Revelation talks about things that are anti-Christ, or John in 1 John and 2 John, that they are against Christ, that they are not for Christ, they are anti-biblical, that we need to be able to say, hey, we don't want our dollars used towards commissions. We don't want to use our dollars towards restructuring fees. We don't want to use our dollars towards more people gathering together to hang out for National Anti-Racism Training Day. We want our dollars to go towards kingdom gospel work, true kingdom gospel work. And I think that's fair of us. Now, the hang up is they can choose not to. But that's after they've slapped us in the face that we can turn around and look them straight in the eye and offer the other cheek. And it is up to them. I can swallow that a little bit easier rather than just giving them money and going, well, peace out, we're gone. Like that's not how it works. Jesus doesn't say just be completely passive and walk away all the time. You have to stand up for what you believe in, and being so passive that you don't stand up for what you believe in empowers the other side. And I don't want this to make us an us and them, but it is. It truly is. If you watched any of the General Synod stuff. Okay, I rambled way longer. We're looking at 20 minutes now. Here's real short recap. 31 churches are out of the RCA from Dakota Classis that will fill in with the other 45-ish churches that have been approved within the ARC board brought in 45 churches. So as of January 1, ARC has 45 plus churches in it, and it's off and running with how many more of y'all that are watching that are looking towards things. That's really awesome. Maybe a sideline note that, and don't take this as binding or anything, but if you are looking towards the ARC, the words that I've heard kind of tossed around is assessments for the ARC will look at about 3% of total receipts coming in. So rather than per member basis, it will look at funds that came in. So through offerings and gifts and such, that 3% of that would go back to the ARC, 1% to the denomination globally, and 2% to your local network. So we, and Dakota will now be the Dakota Network. 2% of those funds go back to the local ministry that you have. 1% goes towards the global ministry, which is really, really reassuring, which is really nice to know. And then open dialogue about how those funds are being used so that we're all kind of on the same page. I kind of got in the weeds there. One is 31 churches have gone. 3 are left in Dakota Classis with a few other ministries. One of those is possibly looking towards a petition in the near future, probably the beginning of next year, maybe. I don't know. And we approved sending funds for the assessments that we already accrued in arrears to try and keep our word that we would fulfill our obligations, but with the caveat that hopefully we can write in there a designation, a letter of designation. Please use these funds towards these specific ministries. Well, okay, I said 20 minutes. We're at 20 minutes. I think I said like 15 minutes, but stay tuned. I will give you more ARC info as it kind of arises, and maybe some things that are going on around here. Maybe even some info for those of you churches that are trying to work on your articles of incorporation or bylaws. But yeah, we have climbed the labyrinth just a little bit further. And maybe I should say, if you've stuck on this far, the whole idea of climbing the labyrinth is designed to keep you trapped within the maze. And sometimes you need to just not follow the rules of the maze and climb out. Climb to the top where you can see it all. And hopefully this is a place of enlightenment for y'all. Okay, till next time.